So, conquerors usually demand taxes, right? They demand your land, they want your weapons, and they demand absolute submission.
Yeah, they want total, unquestioning compliance.
Right, but they almost never demand a kiss. So, welcome to Reform Thinking. Today we are taking a deep dive into the theological weight of that really startling reality.
It is a pretty shocking concept when you actually stop and think about it.
It really is. And our mission today is to unpack Charles Simeon's rigorous exposition of Psalm 2. We're looking at the 5th volume of his massive work, Horae, Homileticae.
Yeah, and his analysis is just a masterclass in Reformed theological synthesis.
I mean, we are going to look at Simeon's insights on the cosmic, universal rebellion against God's anointed king, and we'll see the utter futility of that resistance and that startling intimacy required in our submission to him.
Which is such a relevant topic.
Yeah.
Because Simeon doesn't paint a picture of, a distant deity. He shows us a reigning sovereign who claims absolute authority over the entire globe.
Yeah, so whether you are catching up on historical theology or, seeking a clearer understanding of divine sovereignty for your own life, this text provides a bracing, unyielding view of reality.
It really does. And that concept of a conquering king demanding a kiss is just, well, it's the perfect lens for examining this text.
So let's look at the boundaries of the text, because Simeon approaches this by acknowledging its immediate historical context first, right?
Right, he does.
Yeah.
He points out that this psalm, in its primary sense, relates to King David.
Like the actual historical figure.
Yeah, the literal king. It
Yeah.
describes the massive, coordinated opposition to David's establishment on the throne of Israel.
Because that historical reality actually happened. The Philistines, the Moabites, the Ammonites, they all raged against the Davidic monarchy.
They did.
Yeah.
But Simeon refuses to let the reader stay there. He quickly directs our attention to the boundaries of the text, showing us how the language just bursts at the seams if we try to confine it to a mortal king.
I mean, he identifies specific phrases that absolutely cannot apply to the historical David.
Absolutely. Like the declaration, "Thou art my son, this day have I begotten thee."
Right, or that staggering promise of the uttermost parts of the earth for thy possession. I mean, those are not the credentials of a local Middle Eastern monarch.
No, not at all. And this brings us right into the heart of a Reformed understanding of covenant theology.
Where the Old Testament types and shadows inevitably point forward to the objective reality found in Christ.
Spot on. David is a type, like a prefigurement, but the substance is the eternal Son of God.
Plus, Simeon makes a crucial point about the command to trust in this king.
Yeah, because to put that kind of absolute trust in a human being like David would be blatant idolatry.
It would be. So the text itself demands a divine subject. But wait, let me ask you something about that.
Sure, go ahead.
You are saying the text demands a divine subject because trusting David would be idolatry. But wouldn't an ancient Israelite just view trust in this context as, political loyalty to their king?
That is a phenomenal question. It strikes right at the heart of biblical hermeneutics.
Because I have to wonder, did the original audience actually realize they were dealing with a text that extended so far beyond their local political situation?
We often assume ancient Israelites read their texts with a flat, purely political lens, but the historical evidence suggests otherwise.
Really? So they didn't just think they were singing a particularly enthusiastic, patriotic song about David's military victories.
No, they absolutely understood that this was pointing to someone greater. Even pre-Christian Jewish scholars interpreted this psalm as a messianic text.
Oh, wow. I didn't know the pre-Christian scholars saw it that way.
Yes, Simeon notes that when you look at the Targums, which are the ancient Aramaic paraphrases of the Hebrew Bible, they saw it.
Right, and the Midrashic literature, too.
Yes, the rabbis consistently associated the king in Psalm 2 with the coming Messiah. Even modern scholars of that tradition who reject Jesus are constrained to acknowledge the messianic language.
So it was universally understood that a divine anointed ruler was being promised, someone whose reign would eclipse the borders of Israel.
Entirely. And of course, the apostles aggressively applied this text to Christ in a way that assumed their Jewish audience would follow the logic.
Like in the book of Acts, right?
Yeah, immediately after the day of Pentecost, in Acts chapter 4, Peter and John quote this psalm. They use it to explain the persecution they are facing from the Sanhedrin.
And then the Apostle Paul uses it too, right? In Antioch.
He does in Acts 13. Paul uses it in his preaching to prove the resurrection. They saw the decree, "Thou art my son, this day have I begotten thee," as being definitively fulfilled when Christ conquered death.
When he walked out of the tomb.
Right. The resurrection was the Father's public declaration of the Son's eternal kingship.
It was the moment the hidden reality of his divine sonship was manifested to the world in undeniable glory.
It was, so we have this divine king installed by the decree of heaven itself.
And the reaction from the earth is just pure, unadulterated rage.
It is. Simeon traces this universal opposition to Christ across all demographics and all eras.
It starts the moment he is born, really, with Herod slaughtering the innocents in a paranoid attempt to destroy him.
And it continues throughout his earthly ministry, culminating in the cross.
What stands out to me here is the strange unifying effect of this cosmic rebellion.
Oh, the unifying effect is fascinating.
Right. You have the scribes, the self-righteous Pharisees, the unbelieving Sadducees, the Roman authorities groups that agreed on absolutely nothing else,
They had completely different theologies and political agendas.
and deep-seated historical animosities. It feels like being at a Yankees versus Red Sox game.
Huh. That is a great way to put it.
I mean, these fans absolutely despise each other. They are shouting insults, ready to come to blows over their differences.
Right.
But the second the umpire makes a terrible call that affects them both, they drop their rivalry. They instantly unite to scream at the umpire.
They unite to scream at the umpire, absolutely. Because the umpire represents an authority imposing limits on their autonomy.
That is it. That sports analogy works perfectly.
Herod and Pilate were essentially the Yankees and Red Sox of first-century Judea. They were historical enemies, competing for jurisdictional control.
But the text tells us they became friends on the very day they conspired against the gospel.
They did. And Simeon points out that this is not just an isolated historical phenomenon. It is a present, ongoing reality.
We see the exact same thing happening in the modern era, don't we?
We really do. People with entirely contrary political sentiments and opposing moral frameworks will seamlessly unite in their hostility toward the gospel.
And from a Reformed perspective, this perfectly illustrates the doctrine of total depravity, doesn't it?
It does, because we hold to total depravity. We know the intellect isn't neutral.
Right. The mind, the will, the emotions, every faculty is tainted by a fundamental aversion to the Creator's absolute authority.
The natural human ego possesses an innate survival mechanism. It violently rejects any sovereign who claims total ownership over its existence.
Which explains why the Pharisees and Sadducees united.
Yeah, the Sadducees were wealthy aristocrats collaborating with Rome to maintain their temple monopoly.
While the Pharisees were strict populists who despised Roman occupation.
Right, but Jesus threatened the Sadducees' economic structure by cleansing the temple.
And he threatened the Pharisees' sociological boundaries by eating with sinners and redefining the Sabbath.
So he was an existential threat to the autonomy of both groups.
That answers the why behind the hatred in such a clarifying way. It is the mechanism of human pride reacting to an existential threat.
It really is. Simeon argues that if we just bring forward the truths of the gospel in a speculative, argumentative way, no one is really offended.
Like, you can have polite debates about intelligent design or the historical manuscript evidence for antiquity.
Yeah, or the sociological benefits of religious community, and the world will applaud your intellectual curiosity.
Because the Romans were happy to add new gods to their pantheon, right? And the Greeks loved debating new philosophical ideas at the Areopagus.
Sure, because you remain in control when you're just debating ideas.
But the world raged against Christ and continues to rage against his church because the gospel demands absolute, unreserved submission.
It is not an invitation to add Jesus to your life as a helpful life coach.
Or an ethical paradigm. It demands that you surrender your entire soul to be washed in his blood and renewed by his grace.
It demands that you no longer belong to yourself.
So for you listening right now, if you have ever wondered why true biblical Christianity faces such intense, almost irrational cultural pushback, this is the reason.
True faith dismantles human autonomy, and the natural mind violently rejects that loss of control.
It is not a matter of lacking evidence, is it?
No, it is a matter of the will refusing to bow. But Simeon is quick to point out the absolute futility of that rebellion.
He really draws our attention to the immense irony in the text.
Yeah, he that sitteth in the heavens shall laugh. The Lord shall have them in derision.
I mean, you have the highest levels of human authority, the kings of the earth, the rulers taking counsel together,
Marshaling all their military might, their political influence, and their intellectual arguments to break God's bands asunder.
and heaven views it as a joke.
Now, we have to be careful here because we are using anthropomorphic language.
Right, God does not literally laugh in the way humans do.
No, but the text uses this imagery to convey infinite superiority.
I am really glad you brought that up, because I have to admit, an infinite God laughing at human rebellion sounds a bit, well, petty or vindictive to the modern ear.
I can see how it sounds that way to some people.
It almost sounds like a Greek deity mocking mortals from Mount Olympus. How does Simeon justify this?
It is a vital distinction to make. It is not the malicious, petty laughter of a tyrant who enjoys watching people suffer.
Okay, so it's not malicious laughter. Then what is it?
It is the laughter of infinite, unassailable security. Think about the scale of the conflict.
Okay.
It is like a single ant standing on a railroad track, threatening to derail a speeding freight train by holding up its front legs.
Oh, wow. Yeah, if you were watching that, you wouldn't feel threatened at all.
You would laugh at the sheer absurdity of the disproportionate forces.
So God's laughter is the expression of the sheer absurdity of finite, dependent creatures attempting to overthrow the self-existent creator.
The creator who holds their very atoms together. Think of the crucifixion.
Right. The enemies of Christ thought they had won.
They rolled a massive stone in front of the tomb, sealed it with the insignia of the Roman Empire, and posted a heavily armed guard.
They used every ounce of human and political strength to keep the Son of God in the grave.
But at the appointed hour, it was all entirely useless. Christ rose triumphant.
This connects directly to the Westminster Confession's teaching on the eternal decrees of God, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. The confession states that God from all eternity did, by the most wise and holy counsel of his own will, freely and unchangeably ordain whatsoever comes to pass.
So when God says, I will declare the decree, it means the outcome is settled before the foundation of the world.
Yes, what Jehovah ordains will come to pass, unstoppably, regardless of human resistance.
That means the rulers of the earth were actually fulfilling God's predetermined plan, even as they actively rebelled against him.
They thought they were destroying the king, but they were actually providing the atonement that would establish his kingdom forever.
That is the genius of divine providence. And that is why heaven laughs.
It is. When you actually stop and think about that, it was incredibly comforting.
It really is. And the imagery Simeon uses here is vivid and undeniable.
He likens the spread of the gospel to a stone cut out of the mountain without hands.
Which is a reference to the book of Daniel, right? Describing a kingdom not built by human engineering or military conquest.
Right. This unhewn stone rolls down and shatters the great image representing the massive, intimidating empires of the world.
The Babylonians, the Medo-Persians, the Greeks, the Romans.
And that stone expands across the globe to become a mountain that fills the whole earth.
Meanwhile, the very nation that opposed him, the religious leaders who orchestrated his crucifixion, faced swift divine displeasure,
Culminating in the utter destruction of Jerusalem and the temple in AD 70.
You know, we look around at our current cultural landscape. We see the rulers of our day taking counsel against the Lord, and it is incredibly easy to feel intimidated or pessimistic.
It is easy to get defensive. But Simeon's application of this text is that the kingdom is constantly extending.
Every enemy will eventually be put under his feet or broken like a potter's vessel.
The victory does not depend on our political savvy or our cultural influence or our marketing strategies.
The outcome is predetermined by the decree of Jehovah, which sets up the central, most shocking command of the psalm.
Yes, since resistance is futile, and since the king will conquer all opposition, the text pivots to a universal ultimatum.
And it is here that we find the most surprising phrase in the entire text. It commands a specific posture of surrender.
Kiss the Son, lest he be angry.
Simeon breaks this down meticulously, doesn't he?
He does. He explains that it required a submission to his authority, love for his person, and devotion to his cause.
But, you know, as we highlighted in the opening of our discussion, the nature of this command completely subverts human expectations of a conquering monarch.
It subverts everything.
I mean, if a conquering king breaches the walls of your city, destroys your defenses, and defeats your army, you expect him to demand tribute.
You expect him to demand that you lay down your weapons, bow your head to the dirt, and swear a legally binding oath of allegiance.
And you comply because he has a sword to your neck.
You offer a begrudging, resentful submission just to keep your head attached to your shoulders.
But this king demands a kiss. It implies a level of affectionate devotion that goes far beyond reluctant compliance.
It is not enough to just grit your teeth and follow the rules because you are afraid of facing judgment.
He wants your heart. He wants your affection. He wants you to actually delight in his rule.
To understand the weight of this, Simeon provides some essential historical context regarding the ancient Near East.
Because in that cultural setting, a kiss was a recognized formal symbol of profound allegiance, wasn't it?
Yes, a symbol of religious devotion. When the prophet Samuel anointed Saul to be the first king of Israel, he kissed him.
As a token of submission to the new authority vested in him by God.
Furthermore, idolaters were known to kiss their idols in total unreserved devotion.
Like the prophet Hosea talks about those who kiss the calves, referring to the golden calves set up for false worship.
Exactly. We also see this in the New Testament, when Mary wept and kissed the feet of Jesus, expressing a fervent, overwhelming attachment to him.
Therefore, to kiss the Son means giving Christ the exact same faith, honor, and reverential affection that is due to the Most High God.
The theological implication here is staggering, and it cuts to the core of Reformed soteriology.
Because Simeon points out that a constrained, forced obedience is entirely unacceptable to God.
If you view his commandments as a heavy yoke, or if you are only obeying him to avoid punishment while your heart secretly longs for the things of the world,
that is not true submission.
no, true obedience must spring from a regenerated heart. It requires the inward work of the Holy Spirit.
Changing our fundamental desires so that the law of God becomes a delight rather than a burden.
The Stoic philosophers taught that you should do your duty because it is logical, even if you hate it.
But Christian theology demands that you do your duty because your heart has been changed to love the lawgiver.
And when you read Simeon's breakdown of what this kiss actually entails, it forces you to look in the mirror.
I know for me it makes me ask, am I just resigned to God's sovereignty or am I actually delighted by it?
That is the real question.
For you listening, it forces a direct evaluation of your own posture toward God. Is your religion a heavy duty?
Is it a checklist of moral behaviors you perform to appease an angry deity?
Or is it characterized by the affectionate devotion Simeon describes? Because offering outward compliance while your inward disposition is hostile is a dangerous game.
Think of Judas Iscariot. He approached Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane and offered a kiss.
He used the exact symbol of affection and loyalty, but it was a kiss of betrayal.
It was an outward show of devotion masking a heart of troven.
And Simeon suggests that such a hypocritical display only aggravates our condemnation. The demand is for absolute sincerity.
Sincerity is required, and no one is exempt from the requirement.
Because the psalm specifically addresses the kings and judges of the earth.
Be wise now, therefore, O ye kings. Be instructed, ye judges of the earth.
Simeon dismantles the common delusion that religion is only a crutch for the poor, the weak, or the uneducated.
He points out the great leveling effect of the gospel. In the sight of God, all men are completely equal in their dependency and their accountability.
No amount of wealth, no elevated social status, and no level of advanced education shields a person from their responsibility to the Creator.
The monarchs, the tech billionaires, the prime ministers, and the Supreme Court justices are just as obligated to bow the knee and kiss the Son as the most obscure, impoverished peasant.
And the warning attached to this command is severe, isn't it?
It is. Kiss the Son, lest he be angry, and ye perish from the way, when his wrath is kindled but a little.
Simeon points out that Christ, precisely because of his infinite holiness and love, is susceptible to a holy indignation against those who slight his grace.
The phrase kindled but a little is absolutely terrifying.
It really is. It means that even the smallest fraction of divine wrath is enough to result in eternal ruin.
There is no escaping it through human strength, clever philosophical arguments, or vast wealth.
But I want to ask about reconciling that wrath with the blessing that follows.
Okay, let's look at that.
How do we hold those two realities together? The text does not leave us in a place of sheer terror.
No, it shifts immediately to a magnificent promise. Blessed are all they that put their trust in him.
To kiss the Son is synonymous with putting your trust in him, and trusting him makes a person inconceivably blessed.
We reconcile them by recognizing that the wrath is the just response to rejecting the only source of life, while the blessing is the natural result of hiding in the appointed refuge.
I see.
Simeon explains that to put your trust in him brings peace to the conscience, complete justification for all offenses, and sufficient grace for every single day.
In Reformed terminology, he becomes our wisdom, our righteousness, our sanctification, and our redemption.
You cannot stand before the wrath of the king on your own merit. You must take refuge in the king himself.
His atoning sacrifice is the only shield against his own righteous judgment.
That is the pastoral assurance that Simeon leaves us with, and it is the culmination of his entire discourse.
He stresses that no matter what your past sins have been or what heinous acts of rebellion you have committed,
or what present doubts you are wrestling with, no creature that possessed this genuine trust in Christ ever perished.
If you take refuge in him, you are guaranteed an incorruptible inheritance.
You are protected by his might, preserved by his grace, and enriched by his bounty.
The world may rage, the cultural elites may mock, and the rulers may take counsel together.
But the person who has kissed the Son is eternally secure.
We have covered a massive amount of theological ground today.
We really have.
We started by looking at the world's futile, coordinated rebellion against God's eternal decree.
We examined the psychological mechanism of total depravity, seeing how human autonomy naturally despises divine sovereignty.
We looked at the laughter of heaven, the absolute certainty of Christ's predetermined victory.
And finally, the glorious, startling invitation to affectionately submit to the King of Kings.
We leave you with this final thought to mull over.
Since Simeon makes it entirely clear that forced, grudging obedience is rejected by heaven, what needs to change in your own heart?
Right, what needs to change so that your daily submission feels less like signing a restrictive contract and more like kissing the sun?
Think back to that royal hall. The king is on the throne. A decree is declared. How will you approach him?
Thank you for joining us on this rigorous theological deep dive. Until next time, keep thinking.